All right, we are just getting started here. Awesome. All right, let's get going. I want to, first of all, welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is the first webinar that we are doing at the Juice. So I know everyone's got a super busy schedule, so we appreciate you taking some time out of your day to be with us. We're going to be exploring the topic of how to align your sales and marketing team around modern data. It is something that we've been talking a lot about at the Juice, and I've got a couple of experts here to help us out. I'll introduce myself out of the gates. I am Brett Mcgrath. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at the Juice. I'm a marketer, so I got to plug us. If you're not familiar, the Juice is a content curation platform for B2B marketing and sales professionals in the distribution channel for brands who want to reach them. If you're looking for answers that go beyond the everyday Google search, join the Juice. You can do that for free at the Juice HQ. Okay, no more plugs from me. Let's get going with introducing today's guests. I am really excited to be joined by Chad Tribuco from Guru and Alex Sakakis from Sales Assembly. Welcome to the webinar. How are you guys today?
Doing well. Thanks, Brett.
So good. So good.
That's awesome to hear. Nathan is the producing for us today. So if you hear us calling for Nathan in the background, he's helping make things move. Nathan, maybe if you'll move to the kind of next slide, we can have, outside of me trying to ramble and introduce Chad and Alex, I'd love to maybe hear kind of who you are, your role, and share a little bit about the companies that you work for. And Chad, maybe we can start with you.
Cool. Thanks, Brett. And thanks, Nathan, for pulling this together. So I'm Chad Tribuco. I'm based in Santa Barbara, California, and I run revenue enablement at Guru. Before here, I ran enablement for a startup based in Copenhagen. So I had some fun times waking up early. Then before that, I was at LinkedIn and then an HR startup called Glint that was eventually acquired by LinkedIn. So that's how I got there. And that's actually how Alex and I met. We first began to collab way back when at LinkedIn. We worked on the same go-to-market team, and it's fun to collab again for sure. And for those who don't know what Guru does, let me sum it up. So think about sort of company information. It lives everywhere: email, Slack, wikis, internets, people's heads. So it can be pretty impossible to answer questions efficiently and effectively, not to mention all of the pings that enablement gets that are repeat. Where's this? Where's that? So Guru is the single source of company information, from product to sales enablement to onboarding to internal comms. Guru provides ready access for everyone, and right where they're already working: Slack, Chrome, all of those places. So saves a ton of time, helps reduce some burnout. I actually got to know Guru back in 2016 as a customer, and have long schemed to be here. So it's honestly a dream come true to be in seat here. And with that, probably overly long intro, I'll pass it to my friend Alex.
Cool. Thank you, Chad. Yes, we partner together on a nice and regular basis. So it's always fun to see sort of Chad back in the saddle, even in at different companies. Okay, who am I? Alex Zakakis. I'm VP of Enablement at Sales Assembly. A little history. I was at a company called Sprout Social and built the enablement program there. I was at a company at LinkedIn. I was in charge of all enablement there. As far as you all know, that's true. I'm now at a company called Sales Assembly. My role here is interesting. We've got, it's basically, we've built a membership company. The idea being we help B2B tech businesses scale. And so we do that in two ways. We help with personal development of a bunch of different personas like BDR, SDR, AE, CSM, leadership, so on and so forth. So we help with the personal development side of things. And we help with infrastructure development. Like, how do you ensure that as your business grows, you're doing so in the most meaningful way? And so we do that through a membership model. I could talk about this for days. I won't do that. But my job here is to ensure that I help both folks in enablement get better at enablement, and I help folks that are doing enablement at their companies do that better as well. So that's me in a nutshell, just a Midwest dad talking about enablement.
I love it. A big fan of Guru and Sales Assembly, and we did not. It was not manufactured that Chad and Alex knew each other before this. It organically happened. So I think that will lead to some good vibes and chemistry throughout this conversation. And maybe I'd love to maybe kind of shoot a poll out there for the audience. So if we could do that while I'm doing some housekeeping items, we put a poll out there. Would love to know just how often new content is being shared between your sales and marketing team. And we can share those results with you all. But just some housekeeping before we get going. If you have to leave, no worries. We are going to be sharing this recording via email afterwards. We are going to also be spending some time at the end doing some Q&A. So if Chad and Alex say something that you're interested in exploring or learning more on, please don't hold back. Put those questions in the Q&A and we will address them at the end. But let's jump into it. So Nathan, maybe if you could take the slides off and just show our faces and we'll get into it. So maybe from the top, I think let's start with enablement. You both are in enablement roles. I think it is a word that comes up a lot when we're talking about supporting our sales team, but not all of us have formal enablement kind of functions within our organization. I would love to know, and Chad, maybe we start with you, is what does enablement mean to you? Kind of what types of things are you responsible for? And why do you think enablement should matter to your sales stakeholders?
Great question. And it's fun because I always learn from these answers because we can look at enablement in different ways. But for me, enablement is really about instilling confidence in the field so that they can do what they need to do to meet their targets. So for starters, if you don't have enablement, sometimes just putting someone on it part-time or full-time, someone being in seat can be a boost of confidence for the team. They know there's a backstop, someone working on their behalf. So I think that's always fun to see when that happens, just sort of the bump that occurs there. Now to some of the things that I run, of course, there's content production, curation. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. Also a lot of training and distilling down what matters, making sure that the team is ready in a bunch of different ways, from a skills perspective to a product perspective to awards and recognition, which is always fun. And then lastly, I'm responsible for all of the assessment. So how is this information landing? How are these programs landing? What's the impact? What do we need to stop, start, and continue? And then reporting back and building programs on that to address them. So, I think this matters to my team. And in most cases, I've seen, sales folks are hungry. They're artists to some degree. They're fierce adapters and adopters. So they're very motivated to grab onto what we're providing from an enablement standpoint so they can bring home a bit more revenue. And then for the wider org, I think enablement matters because we often serve as sort of that last mile before it kind of gets thrown over the fence. And I think we can provide like a really cool sort of feedback loop there for the rest of the org. Alex, I'm sure you'll say something way better.
I got to comment first. I'm going to write this down, but sales are artists. I think that's wonderful. And that is something I'm going to use internally. And I think that might be able to help bridge the gap and create better relationships. But I love that descriptor. Sorry to interrupt. I just had a comment. Alex, go ahead.
No, listen, I don't have anything better to say. I just have more things to say. The way I think about it, so first and foremost, enablement is defined differently. Basically, like every person I talk to, they're like, I do enablement this way and I do it this way. I'm like, I don't understand why we all can't get along. That's not true. We all get along. The way I think about enablement, though, is making the revenue team as efficient and effective as possible. And there's a number of different ways that people do that, but like that's sort of the core in my mind how I think about it. How that happens to me, it's Chad, you mentioned something about like making folks more confident. I think it's like providing a safe space where people can practice their art, right? So to speak. To me, it's giving easy access to the information that they need to be successful, whether that be content or like ways in which to improve the work that they're doing. It's making processes easy to use so people can do their job effectively in the job, but also making customers appreciate and make it easy for them to buy. So it's like both internal and external. I think about it less as like a training, like I'm going to get up here and just like tell you everything you need to do, but more in like coaching and development. I think enablement is that. And I would also say, in the same vein of like being in, like these folks are artists, like help them be a better artist. It's help them be more wise. So as opposed to like feeling like they need to come in here and just regurgitate a bunch of like information, it's I can help you solve your problems as opposed to help you determine that my solution is the best fit. It's like, how can I be more wise to help a customer instead of help myself?
I love that. I also think it's important what you called out too, just the fact that enablement is defined differently across all organizations, and probably the role and responsibilities are different. So I think part of the catalyst for this conversation is just to share those perspectives from two people doing it in different places. So that's awesome. Maybe we jump into just like, I think about enablement, and I think about just the last couple of years, right? Most of us are working in a distributed fashion at some point. We're, kind of heads down in isolation. We've got, technology to help bring us together. But I guess, what are the best ways you've seen enablement distributed in kind of like the remote and hybrid work environments?
I'll start because I just want to comment on something Alex said that I thought was really, really cool. Like, not just training and showing up and sort of like spilling onto the team and saying, now tell me what I just told you. I think enablement can really get out of the way and sort of facilitate some of that peer-to-peer learning, some of that coaching, some of those aha moments that, people will really learn from more so than if I told them the aha. So I love that you point that out, Alex. And I think it's kind of a nice segue to this idea of more remote work, because I think in some ways it lends itself to a new way of getting out of the way. We're not doing what we used to do, where we'd get everybody together for a sales kickoff all in one place all of the time, and sort of like condense training down into a day and a half or 2 days. I think we're finding ways to centralize information in certain places. Obviously, Guru is one of them. But I think, I love being able to do that because I think we can scale ourselves. So I'll tell a quick story if there's time, but looks like I'm getting a head nod. So just an example of sort of like doing this remotely. When Alex and I were at LinkedIn, we rolled out this new sort of pilot program across 400 people in APAC. I was based here in California. COVID was kicking off. I won't get into that. But the challenge was to build a program to onboard these reps, get them familiar with the content. They were selling a new platform in a new way. And then also provide a steady drip of updates as that product evolved and they were sort of catching up. So this is when I was at Glint and LinkedIn. We used Guru. I managed everything in Guru versus email or Teams or some sort of portal. I created a simple 15-minute how-to guiding them through how we sort of set this up and then just like set them loose. And it just cut down on all these late night pings. I wasn't waking up in the middle of the night trying to answer people in Singapore. And it got the reps confident. I think back to that term, confidence, got them confident that like they could answer their questions without sort of having to ping me. So in some ways it put enablement in the box and got me out of the way. So with that, I would love to hear what Alex has to say on this one.
Yeah, it's getting out of the way is a like the nice way to phrase it. It's like, I don't want enablement to be the bottleneck, right? If I'm a sales rep, a sales manager, like if I've got a question, I want the question answered. If I've got some area that I want to get better at, like I don't want to wait a week or 2 weeks for the content to be done or the webcast to happen or things like that. So it's like the more that folks can get out of the way, especially in this distributed time that we're in right now, Brett, I think how you phrased it, I think that's the sort of the way that we can do it best. Because the challenge is like providing the same impactful and effective experience, regardless of time zone, regardless of location or availability, right? Like some folks aren't working every day of the week, or they work at different times of the day, or things like that. And so like the more that we can provide the same experience, regardless of that, the better off we're going to be. I'd say like the other piece is it's important to empower folks in the business to be their own learners. So as opposed to saying like, everything's got to go through enablement, like you can't learn anything unless you learn from me. Like, I liked when that was the case because it made me feel good. But at the same point, like leaders should be able to coach their team based on the information that we give the whole org. Learners should be able to find things on their own based on what we provide for the whole org. And the more that we have to be in the way, the less effective we are. I'd say I'll say one more thing, which is it's apparent that people learn differently now than they've ever learned in the past. Whether that be the influence of TikTok or the way in which people like actually interface with their laptop, it's just different. And so being cognizant of learning styles and learning preferences is so important as well. And so when we think about distribution, it's same experience. It's making sure people can learn from whatever way they want to learn. And it's also like making sure we provide different ways to learn so people can have options of where and how they access the thing they need to do their job effectively.
Wow. Yeah. Unbelievable. I love the way that you're thinking about it. I think one of the key things and what with both of what you mentioned are talking about just content in general. And just like, I think we're in a state, especially as you referenced TikTok, we've got LinkedIn, we've got all these distribution channels, and we're all creating for them. So we're kind of on content overload. I talk a lot about that from a marketing perspective externally. And as we were preparing for this, is the first time I was really thinking about it internally. And I just think there's so much information at the fingertips of our sales team, from like blogs to, case studies, objection handling documents. And I think it's challenging, especially when they're trying to hit a quota, kind of to separate what's the good from the bad, or from the new from the outdated and irrelevant. I'd love to know how companies can create maybe a strong knowledge culture where teams are able to quickly surface the important information, so they'll use it and it'll help set them up for success. Maybe Alex, we'll start with you on this one. Give you the first swing.
A lot of pressure. Okay. It's so interesting because if we think about like how you develop skills when you're growing up, right? We don't expect, like, my son did soccer. He did it a couple times and he was not good. And I was supportive of him, but I wasn't like, all right, like you've learned it, like now you can go play a game. In the same way, like we shouldn't expect that folks, like we give them one piece of information, say like, okay, you got it, right? Like just go do this now for the rest of your life, your job, whatever. And so part of it is this consistent messaging over time, and sort of like this consistent way of helping folks learn these things, as opposed to like a point in time. It's like a campaign of learning, so to speak. So like that's part of it. And I'd say in enablement, we're constantly trying to solve that. So it's like we're not over messaging, we're messaging in the right way that people want, that they actually can learn from. So that's a challenge I think we'll always face. I think one of the ways in which it's starting to come to fruition is through content management systems in some capacity or another, which is surfacing the content that's most effective for learners. It's the content that's most effective for deals closing, things like that. I think content management systems is a way in which that can happen, whether it's actually like a tool or if it's just like a system that you put in place. I think another way is ensuring that the messaging that enablement does through either a learning management system or through a comms channel play, I think that needs to be really thoughtful and consistent as well. And I think we also have to be cognizant of the expectations that we're setting for leaders as well as frontline folks, that stuff can't be spoon-fed in that way anymore. I think in the past that was sort of like we relied on enablement to do all the training, but like now it's like we can't rely. We just talked about we can't be that bottleneck. And so ensuring that expectations are clear, that this is truly a culture of learning and development, and therefore the expectation is that you have to be both present for your own learning and development, but also give feedback when you need, want more, don't understand, that type of thing. So it's really like a joint system across enablement, content management teams, the learners. Like everyone's got to be involved in this. Otherwise, you don't have that culture of learning and development and content. It's more siloed and dispersed, which doesn't work.
Chad?
I love that we're like riffing on all of these, and there's like a thread that kind of comes through each question, because I love that idea of like not being the bottleneck, kind of an always on distributed world, providing sort of information in a way that different types of learners in different types of environments, in different types of time zones, can sort of pick them up and get the same experience. And I think sometimes I've seen like enablement almost get over engineered, and like we try to get into the learner's mind too much and try to like solve for either like some, ivory tower situation, or we're trying to solve for every single possible scenario. And I think I'll tie this up and say like one way, and Alex touched on this, content management. I think search, when you have a powerful search, that enables a lot of sort of those use cases, both the edge cases and the majority cases, where a learner can go in and find exactly what they need when they need it. And do that in a way that's in their workflow. They're not having to remember which tool or system or technology this information was housed in. One thing we do at Guru that our head of internal comms, Julia Satha, does, which I think is just brilliant, because I've come into companies and there's this tool, that tool, and everybody's using the tool a little bit differently. Some people are using Asana, some people are using this project management tool. But what Julia has done is sort of mapped out the process. You use this when you're doing X. Here at Guru, we use Slack when you're responding to these types of things. When you're building a program, you start with Asana. And she has this like little roadmap. And I think to your point of information overload, Brett, like I think it can get really confusing, especially for an onboarder. Like, where do I do this? And then we all sort of settle into our habits. And I know I'm riffing a little bit here, but I think it's really important to sort of map that out so that as things move forward, your content culture sort of has its little defined areas. So I'll share that around. I just thought of it, but I'll try to get that in your hands so we can share that around, because I think it's a helpful way to sort of place all of this information in context for everyone in the org.
Yeah, as you were describing that piece of content, I've struggled with that for sure, and I'm sure others out there have as well. I think that would be a nice branded Guru resource that might go viral. I know I would probably copy it, so would love to see that. Let's jump into like maybe your sales team and how they can be more effective. When I think about sales and I think about the use of content just from the marketing perspective, I think about, how is sales using the content that we're creating for outreach? How are they using it to manage their pipeline? And ultimately, how are they using it to win new business? So maybe we'll start with outreach, just how leveraging branded content created from your team can help lead to more conversations, and maybe sharing that from kind of an enablement perspective. Alex, if you want to start.
Yeah, from my perspective, like whenever I've bought software, been a part of the buying committee, whatever, I think the more that it's felt like the rep has had my best interest at heart, both from like a learning perspective of like, have you thought about things in this way? Have you scoped the problem in that way? I think the more that folks can help with that, the better off the buying experience has been. And I'll tie this back to like branded content, which is, that's great if you can do it one-to-one, but like as a business, it's got to be scalable, right? So the more in which you can have branded content that can help these buyers determine how to do things in the best way and learn about themselves in the process, the better off they are. And so like, that's how I think about branded content, is helping individuals have better conversations with their buyers and then scaling that across the business so we know effectively that this can happen, as opposed to it being like, I wrote this one really great email, but only I've got access to this email, or I've got this really great deck that I have, but like I built it myself and it's not really branded in the way that it should be. So it's like the more it can be scalable, the better it can be for this whole buying process, including like how the reps interact with the buyers.
I'd love to maybe ask a follow-up question on that. Have you found that from a kind of enablement perspective that it's typically to like measure if it's scalable or not, like testing it with a group of reps, or is it just kind of a rollout to the general population? Like, what have you found has worked best for you?
Yeah, from my perspective, that's a great question too. From my perspective, it's not just testing it after the fact. It's building it with a tiger team of reps that can provide input as it's happening. So you have like a good sense of like, we're moving in the right direction, something that people can actually use. And then, the way in which some content management platforms work is like, you can see the content that was tied to successful deals, right? So like getting a sense from that perspective of like, this content was tied to this deal and that's successful. And then tied to all these deals that was successful. I like that a bit. Not a bit. I like that a lot. And then anecdotally getting a sense from like Gong or whatever, Chorus, whatever sort of like listening tool, getting a sense from there is also super helpful anecdotally. And then feedback directly from reps of like, this worked or this didn't work, whether or not it's tied to data or not, like getting that feedback loop happening. For me, that's how you can get a sense of like, if it's viral or scalable or whatever term you want to use.
I love it. Chad, I know you've got some thoughts on this, maybe too, just like pipeline management oriented, but would love to kind of hear your perspective.
Yeah. And I just sent Nathan that infographic. So if he wants to pop it up, I was able to pull it up pretty quickly that I was just talking about. I think on the outreach side, something I've seen actually be pretty interesting that I hadn't seen before is like some content that I just emailed it to you, Nathan. It's not that one. Sorry. We've done some partnership case studies where it almost feels like we're behind the scenes and it's like name dropped, but it's not sort of branded. And I think that almost gives like an extra bit of validation we have one from that's basically with Shopify and Slack. And I think that's an interesting way to use outreach and use sort of like branded content in a way that's subversive is probably the wrong word, but I think that's an interesting way to do it. And it sort of kind of takes the load off, your marketing team to do it with somebody else. On the pipeline side, and this is where that graphic that Nathan just popped up. Sorry, I've got lots of slides here. We put together this ROI calculator in partnership with Forrester. They did a bunch of independent research. And basically we're calculating the time saved and then applying a dollar amount to that based on, salaries and that type of thing. Based on independent research from Forrester on how much time folks are spending searching for information, answering questions, switching between tabs. And we've calculated that all out. This has been a really cool sort of like pipeline management doc and sort of like driving energy in different ways. You can imagine an SDR using this to sort of like say, hey, customers like you are saving X amount. And you can see like the ROI, the 1 year ROI, like that's actually pretty low. We see really, really high ROI based on these numbers, and the numbers are actually pretty conservative. You can also see it from a rep's perspective when they're getting further down in the deal cycle and they're trying to build the business case towards the end. They're talking to execs. Execs want to know what's the ROI, what are we getting out of this? And then you can imagine from an expansion perspective, we can show, hey, this is your usage so far. If you were like such and such company, or if your usage were increased, in these different areas or across these different departments, your ROI would increase X amount. So this is like kind of pipeline momentum in a bunch of different areas. And it's been a really cool piece of collateral that we've used and leveraged quite a bit, and we're still leveraging. So we recently did a webinar about this. I think we'll send out a link to that as well if you want to know a little bit more. But really cool way to sort of push pipeline and unstick deals.
I love this. I think data is certainly important, and I would love to maybe transition to more of a deeper dive conversation around data. I think anyone who has been in a enablement or a content role for a while has gotten the question from their boss or their boss's boss, what's the ROI of our enablement program? I think there's so many ways that we can think about it and respond, but the most impactful way always revolves around the ability to use data to tell stories and how content helped assist in the sales process. Just maybe diving into a couple questions around here, around this topic. How do you think we can use data to gain sales buy-in to help jumpstart the use of content? Maybe Alex, if you want to start with that one.
Yeah. To me, it should be fairly simple. Now, of course, I say that, and I know nothing is ever as simple as it is on a webinar. But it's something along the lines of like, this content is used to close more deals, and the way we know that is because like it's attached to deals that close at a higher rate. And so like that's sort of simple metric of like, this content should equal more closes. Like, again, feels simple. TBD if it actually is, but like that to me feels like the sort of like quickest line from A to B.
Yeah, I think to your point, Alex, like I've felt that, and I think one of the things I've seen work really, really well is then showing the plays where it's applied. Right? It's one thing to say, hey, this piece of content works, this pivot works. But then showing examples, I try to get my team, I do this like session called From the Field, and I try to get my team to sort of like show these things in action, because I think that's enablement getting out of the way. And I'm sure you do this too, but like it seems simple, but it actually is super powerful to show those plays where, then the rep doesn't have to be as creative to think, okay, how do I fit this in? They can see it in action. So I love that idea.
What about?
Thought is,
go ahead.
I was going to say, the thought is like, let me share exactly how I use this content within my process to help close the deal. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that.
What about? I think about just from like a marketing perspective, all the work we pour into like content creation and how, we're, creating blog posts, articles, podcast episodes, videos, all of these things that we're distributing where our future customers are hanging out to learn. However, like oftentimes we know that they're picking up traction based on feedback, but maybe they don't tie back to your CRM, or we can't attribute them to, a line item in a CSV file. I'd love to know maybe like, how do you think about tying kind of content from an enablement perspective back to some of the accounts that your sales team is actively pursuing?
Is that question for me? Sorry, I think my internet cut for a second.
Yes, go for it, Chad.
Cool. I think it's tough. I think it's tough to sort of like see all of the things that are used. And I think we use a lot of data to sort of see where these things are happening. I would say more important than finding the exact piece of data. And, with Guru, you can sort of see, how many times this has been viewed, how many times it's been favorited. So that's like a good measurement for me. But to see like what reps are using consistently, and then introduce more that's similar, so that, they're not relying on, the 4 to 5 that they always go to. And then I think to Alex's point earlier, like ask them. That feedback loop that he was talking about is super important. I run a survey for my team. We can maybe get into that in a little bit. And I'm probably biased coming from the survey world at Glint, but like that survey has been really helpful to sort of see at scale, what are the things that are moving the needle? Because I think one piece of content will work well for a bit, and then, folks will move on. So I think sometimes looking at it not at the granular level, but thinking more about behaviors can be sort of an important way to crack that nut.
Alex, do you have anything to add there?
I mean, the challenging thing is understanding buying signals in a meaningful way. And sometimes we don't take the time to really understand what buying signals are in the process. But the more that we are aware of the buying signals, the easier it will be to determine like what action, whether that be content related or non-content related, but whatever the actions are that are important at that based on that buying signal, continue to move the deal forward. I think the more that we can understand buying signals, regardless, it helps in this process. I don't know how intelligent some of these platforms are in that sense of being able to, tie one to the other. But I think reps, to your point, Chad, like reps should have a sense of the amount of times they're running through deals on what some of the buying signals are and like what makes sense to happen at those junctures. And so if it's not the tool itself, then it's leveraging surveys, it's leveraging anecdotal feedback, it's leveraging a listening tool like a Gong or Chorus to validate some of that feedback as well. So
I think a lot about the buying signals, and I think just it seems to me that there's been a lot more conversations around intent data and how do we use intent data just from a sales, marketing, CS, enablement perspective. Are there any, just as we think about this, are there any other specific data points around content that you think we should be focusing on right now that might not be something that's widespread, but just something that you're thinking about? Maybe we can start with you, Chad.
I think I almost want to kick it to Alex because I'm sure he has many more at bats than I do. I will come back to that ROI calculator and the ways that we can sort of provide that in ways that get us out of the way. We're building this into our website so folks can interact with it. I think that's an interesting piece of content and certainly a buying signal if someone's figuring out the ROI of our platform. Alex, I'm sure you can riff a lot better on this one than me.
I have thoughts. Either way, we're walking a tightrope back here. For me, it's all about conversion and engagement with the data, right? Like, and none of that stuff is wild, but I think too often folks are relying on like gut instinct of like, oh, I know this works. I send it every time. It's like my number one piece of content. And like, that may be right and it may be wrong. And the only way we can get a better sense of that is like, if we're truly measuring the conversion of content equals this and engagement within that content, right? It's sort of like both sides of that coin. Because just because a content is related to a close doesn't mean that it's correlated necessarily. Or just it doesn't mean correlation doesn't equal causation. So it doesn't mean one caused the other. But if there's engagement in the content and the deals are closing, like both of those pieces together feel like the data that, while not super wild and new, are probably the ones that are the most important for us to continue to like focus on going forward.
Love that. A lot of stuff in there that I think we should all take note of. I think people love stories and real life examples. So maybe we kind of head there. I'd love to know just like what examples that you both have with enabling your sales team around content. And Chad, maybe we can start with you from the guru perspective.
Yeah. Of course, Guru is like the nerve center of what we do. And I'm pretty fortunate that my team is well accustomed to using it day in and day out, because in a lot of ways, Guru is a content management system. I think it's a little bit more. And one innovative way that we've been using it sort of in a different way is through what we call announcements. So traditionally, I've seen like content management systems almost as like a giant message board of content. Alex, we saw this at LinkedIn with all the different Go links or some sort of shared desktop. But with announcements, you can really cut through the noise and sort of push information to particular people, put it right in the hands of those who need it. And I think, this is a way that I'm pushing my team to, like, back to that information overload. Like, it's not just an alert that they get another ping, another little red circle, but it sort of lives on a homepage for them. So it like kind of gets a little bit more embedded. And then as a content producer, I can see stats on how it's viewed. Folks can click, I've read this. So there's a sense of that kind of like measuring the content that we were talking about earlier. So that's sort of one way that, like, an example of how we're kind of centering around content in a way, in a culture that's already really centered around content.
Before Alex, before we maybe pitch it to you, I'm curious, Chad, just like on the results side, are you seeing, based on that example, higher rep engagement on those pieces? And like, is like just engagement, is that the primary kind of unit that you're tracking to see whether, this is successful or not, or is it something else?
Yeah, I think it's one measurement. To Alex's point earlier, like, it's a campaign, right? So that's one metric, but then talking about it in all hands, talking about it in roundtables, and sort of seeing like the threads pop up or the seeds pop up from that content that was pushed out, and then seeing how reps are using it, showing that, having them talk about it. I think, it's again one metric, but it's a helpful metric.
I love it. Alex, what about you at Sales Assembly? I'd love to hear any examples that you've got.
Yeah. It's enabling on content is always a tricky thing, right? Because it's kind of like this shiny object, right? Like, whenever you develop a piece of content, someone's like, what would be great though? Like, fine, thank you for this. But would be great, this other thing I just thought about. And so when it comes to enabling content, from my perspective, at least the ways in which I've thought about this in the past is trying to build hero content as much as possible, which is like, what's one piece of content that can be sort of universal? And like, maybe you use a little bit like this over here, maybe use a little bit like this over here, but like ultimately this is a place where you can get a number of answers to a number of questions. From there, it's also the idea of like, as opposed to like me just putting content on a platter and saying like, this is something you asked for, it's let's have you take the time to build this culture of learning. Let's have you take the time to learn it and apply it immediately. Like, how can you take this content that we've created, whether it be a case study or a video or a piece of learning content, whatever it is, can you take it and shift your mindset from learner to user immediately? And do so in like not in a vacuum, but like in a dedicated way of like, I'm not just learning this in abstract, but I'm learning it deliberately to use it in a way that is aligned to what my role is, what my job is. And then sort of reinforcing that with success stories or wins or examples in which other folks have done it in a meaningful way. Sometimes you do that through like plants and maybe, some fabricated elements, right? Of like, this, look at this person did this thing that I told you was going to work. Like, sometimes it's that, but some sort of reinforcement mechanism. And then we sort of talked about it earlier, but like, as opposed to an event in time of like this one announcement or this one training or this one whatever, it's how can we loop it in? Chad, sir, you mentioned this of like, it comes up in all hands, it comes up in the team meeting, it comes up in one-on-one coaching, it like comes up throughout. So it's more of this campaign idea as opposed to a point in time, I'm just going to send the content, you figure it out. I'll add one more point here. Gail, I saw your comment in the chat here about like having folks sort of like find their answers themselves. I would have one tweak to that, which is as opposed to folks like finding it themselves, because it's not about the act of finding it, it's the act of like applying it in a meaningful way. And so it goes back to this idea of like, the more that you can have a forcing function of like, now that you've got the content, like how do you immediately use it in your first, couple of hours, days, weeks of getting this content? How can you immediately apply it? To me, that sort of like ownership, is like the sort of like taking it from development to ownership to like reinforcement that way. That's sort of like Not an example necessarily, but that's how I think about it in these terms.
We have, there's been a ton of knowledge shared, a lot of ground covered, so many nuggets. I always like in these types of conversations, when a lot of information is shared, I always like to try to bring it home and tee one last question up for the guests to be like, this is the primary takeaway, or this is what you should be thinking about. And I'll also say, before I ask the question, if you have any additional questions for Chad and Alex that you'd like answered here at the end of this, use the chat box and drop those in now. But I think let's close it out here. What is the first thing that anyone on the call should do to begin a sustainable content activation with their sales team? We'll go with you, Chad.
Thank you. Well, first, shout out to Gail. I love your comment. I nominate you for the next webinar because clearly you've got something to share. And I love that, like, you're bringing up the manager element, because I think, you know, it's something we didn't touch on very deeply, but like that's such a pivotal point for where enablement works or doesn't work. And I love that you're asking that question, like, what do your instincts tell you? And again, that goes back to confidence and trust, which I'm big on. But the one thing that I would say, like, to activate content, understand how your team's using it. Like, if you're not surveying them and you're not asking them in a regular cadence so that you have benchmarks, I highly encourage you to start. Like, it's been a game changer for me to ask how customer stories are going. Ask, like, what do you need? What are the challenges? Where are you using these things? I think it helps you build programs that actually meet their needs versus an ivory tower situation. And if anybody has questions about that, like, please ping me offline, because I'm a big proponent of it, and it's really changed sort of the way I do enablement.
Awesome. Alex?
Yeah, I love that. Let me try and glean a nugget that would be helpful here, because Chad, I feel like that's it. That's that. Okay, so I would say this. When thinking about this, it's so important to be thoughtful about it, because it's relatively easy to build content, right? What's not easy is to do it in the way that's most meaningful and effective to the team. So when you're being thoughtful about it, it's both to know the goal that you're trying to accomplish, right? But also the gap that you're trying to fill. And if you don't think about the end in mind first, then you're building content for content's sake, as opposed to it's solving a very specific need within the business. So start by, like, thinking about the end in mind, be thoughtful about that piece, and then work backwards from there to determine what content makes the most sense for you in the business.
Awesome. I want to make sure this is kind of like the encore. I know we've got that comment from Gail, which was awesome, but before we kind of close out, there is one question that I had saved up that I do want to pitch it your way, because I think it's interesting to think about. But how often should we be thinking about kind of revising, updating our enablement programs? Is this something that is always changing, ongoing, evaluating every year? I'd love to kind of gather both of your insights based on your experience. And Chad, you can start. Or Alex, you can start.
Okay. No, Alex, you start.
I was going to say, Chad, you've taken the lead on a couple of these last ones. Okay, so there's no right or wrong answer here. Like, some of your content, you might do it, and then a week later, it's like it's out of, it doesn't work anymore for whatever reason. Some things can live on for eternity, right? Which in tech, it's like a year. So there's no right or wrong answer. I'd say, like, best practice is probably like every 6 months or so, having a cadence of reviewing the content that is out there to ensure that it still meets the standards that you have of your enablement or your content needs. I believe Guru has a mechanism in place that reminds folks to, like, this content was posted 6 months ago, like, it's time for you to renew it or review it. But I think that's sort of like just sort of picking a number, whether it be 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, whatever, something less than a year where you're having a cadence of reviewing content. And it can be a rolling thing. So it doesn't have to be like all content, like once every 6 months. It can be like, that's just the cadence, though. This is published here. In 6 months, I've got to thing on my calendar where I review it, or I got a ping from my guru that tells me to review it. But that's sort of how I think about it. Is like, there's no right answer. You'll know it if you need to change it based off of like red flags. Otherwise, just build a habit of doing it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that cadence. I'll come back to like thinking about it from a macro level. Like, I think enablement is always needing to be flexible and agile, because, you know, the nature of the game is changing, right? Like, we went through COVID, we're going through like a recession now, potential recession. Like, we're always having to sort of adapt for our teams. And I think the thing that's helped me is sort of having a North Star, and that North Star is confidence. And that's sort of the thing that doesn't change, but becomes the lens with which I see the programs I build and sort of like my approach to enablement go through. So that's the thing that hasn't changed. But like, if I were to try to map out what I would do in the next year, like, there's no way that I would be doing it in 6 months or 3 months. Like, the game is changing too quickly, but that North Star has been super helpful in sort of like keeping that guidance. And then it, you know, to Alex's point, goes into content and refreshing it and making sure that it stays up to date. But I found that to be really helpful.
I love it. So much information shared. We have hey, Chad, if you want, I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit about this event. I know Guru is going to be a part of it, but maybe I saw this and I was like, this is probably a really good continuation of what we're talking about here, but maybe share a little perspective on Knowledge Fest 2022.
Yeah. If I haven't plugged Guru enough, we have an event coming up in September. It's free. It's a webinar, a couple days. There's going to be a ton of speakers that are much smarter than me talking about the new world of work, how to do enablement. We've got speakers from a bunch of different tracks about enablement, about sort of like the larger world of work and how it's changing, and then also how content and enablement sort of mash up and sort of change behaviors and culture. So I think it's a really exciting thing. Like, I was a part of Knowledge Fest before it was virtual, and it was like it was transformational. And I think this one's going to be pretty rad and a lot of fun. So if you're interested, sign up or ping me. Would love to have you there.
Some awesome brands and speakers on the bill there. Maybe we drive to the last slide just so everyone can see where to follow and find us. So if you want to learn more from our respective brands, that's where you should go. Definitely, I'm going to maybe speak for Chad and Alex. If you have questions for any of us, like, definitely feel free to reach out. We'd love to continue this conversation. Again, I know it is not easy to attend almost an hour webinar in your busy work schedule, but really appreciate you taking some time to learn more from a couple enablement experts. And like I mentioned, this is the first of several webinars to come. Appreciate all of your time. And to our guests, Chad and Alex, thank you for bringing your knowledge, and we will talk to everyone really soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Later.